A life is growing inside you. A heartbeat. A soul. But what if that heartbeat isn't your own? What if that life isn't human? What if it's something that has existed since primordial times? Seeking a gateway to return to the world? Today, we will tell the story of a couple. A seemingly romantic trip. And a terrifying rebirth. When a woman is transformed into a vessel for an ancient instinct. This is not just a scary story. This is a warning. Welcome to Whisper Horror Channel, where we unveil mysteries that science cannot explain, fears deeply etched in the mind. If you feel a chill, don't forget to hit like to support us. Share this story so your friends and loved ones can also experience this horror. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next haunting whispers. And comment below, do you believe ancient horrors can still exist in the modern world? Noah Harrison, 30 years old, was a botanist with a sharp mind and a firm belief in scientific principles. He was a man of reason, always seeking explanations based on data and empirical evidence for every phenomenon in the natural world. His calmness and meticulousness helped him excel in his work, but sometimes made him somewhat detached from things beyond scientific comprehension. Ava Reed, Noah's girlfriend, 29 years old, was a young writer with a sensitive soul, rich imagination, and strong intuition. She was easily influenced by her surroundings, especially by mystical stories and atmospheres. Their relationship was a harmonious blend of logic and emotion, science and art. That summer, after Noah and Ava decided to move in together, they planned a special honeymoon, not azure beaches or glamorous cities, but a journey to explore the primeval forest and ancient ecosystems in Olympic National Park, Washington. Noah, with his endless passion for plants, wanted to find an extremely rare prehistoric fern species, one believed to have existed for millions of years. As for Ava, she sought new inspiration for the psychological horror novel she was developing. She wanted to immerse herself in the wild, mysterious beauty of nature to spark unique ideas. After days of hiking, winding through moss-covered trails and towering ancient trees, they accidentally stumbled into a secluded forest area, where sunlight could only filter through dense foliage, creating a dim and mystical space. There, amidst layers of moss and buried rocks, they discovered an ancient stone structure. This structure resembled no known architecture or civilization on Earth. It was formed from large, grayish-green stone blocks, with strange patterns and symbols, as if it had existed since primordial times, consumed by time and nature. It evoked a sense of awe and an indescribable chill. At the center of the stone structure, there was a rough stone altar with a hollow cavity, and inside that cavity was a strange object. An egg-shaped stone. The stone was a deep bluish-black color, with faint glowing patterns, shimmering like blood vessels hidden beneath its surface. It exuded a mysterious, primal beauty, an irresistible allure Ava had never seen before. She was immediately captivated, feeling an inexplicable urge to touch it. Noah, with his cautious nature, warned her. "Don't touch it, Ava. We don't know what it is," he said, his voice full of worry. He sensed a strange energy from the stone. However, curiosity and the stone's strange allure overcame reason. Ava, with eyes sparkling with fascination, still reached out her slender hand, gently touching the stone's cool surface. Immediately, a cold sensation shot up her arm, piercing her bones, making her shiver. At the same time, the stone emitted a very faint heartbeat, a deep, low beat, like the sound of an ancient heart slowly awakening from a 1,000-year slumber. That heartbeat was not just a sound, it was a vibration, an invisible energy permeating Ava's body, making her feel dizzy. Ava startled, pulling her hand back, her face pale. A deep sense of unease enveloped her, a premonition that she had just awakened something beyond human comprehension. That night, as they set up their tent under the ancient trees, both Noah and Ava fell into a strange dream. In their dream, they saw themselves in the middle of a primeval forest, where giant trees stretched towards the sky, roots deeply embedded in the earth. A bluish-black seed, exactly the color of the stone, slowly pierced through the earth, tiny roots crawling out, coiling around everything. Then, from within, a powerful heartbeat echoed. Deep and resonant like a frantic drum, shaking the very ground. That drumbeat was not just a sound, but a resonance, a summoning from a forgotten world. When they woke, both recounted the same dream, their eyes meeting in fright. The egg-shaped stone, the ancient stone structure, and the strange dream, all seemed to connect, forming a terrifying sign of an ancient life trying to be reborn. The special honeymoon in Olympic National Park had ended, but the strange occurrences were only just beginning. A few weeks after returning to their cozy apartment in Seattle, Ava began to exhibit unusual symptoms. She constantly felt utterly exhausted, experienced continuous nausea, and especially had inexplicable, bizarre cravings. She suddenly craved foods she had never considered before, like raw meat, and even fresh soil from their garden. Noah, though worried, still tried to find scientific explanations for these sudden changes, assuming Ava might have food poisoning or stress from the trip. However, all of Noah's rational explanations vanished when Ava went to see a doctor. The medical test results stunned them both. Ava was 6 weeks pregnant. This news was like an electric shock. Neither Noah nor Ava could believe it. They had always carefully used contraception, and Ava had no history of unplanned pregnancies. The couple looked at each other, their eyes filled with disbelief and a vague fear. This was not merely good news, but an unwanted event, a biological miracle beyond their control. Chillingly linked to the fateful touch of the egg-shaped stone in Olympic National Park. Ava felt a cold sensation run down her spine, a premonition that the life growing inside her was not normal. During the first ultrasound, the air in the examination room became stiflingly tense. Noah and Ava sat next to the doctor, their eyes fixed on the ultrasound screen. Initially, the image on the screen was constantly distorted, chaotic waveforms obscuring everything. The doctor tried to adjust the equipment, but all efforts were futile. In a fleeting moment, when the screen temporarily cleared, Noah and Ava caught a glimpse of a shape unlike a normal fetus. It looked like a bluish-black organic mass, with countless tiny tentacles or root-like branches crawling and writhing inside. It had no human form. The doctor also frowned. She quickly waved her hand, assuming it was a machine error, a poor signal, or an unusual fetal position. She reassured them that everything was fine and they would recheck it at the next appointment. But both Noah and Ava knew it wasn't a machine error. That horrifying image was deeply etched into their minds, sowing a new fear: this pregnancy was not human. As time passed, the fetus in Ava's womb grew unusually fast. She felt movements unlike a normal baby. These were not gentle kicks, but strong thumps, violent thrashing, and sometimes the sensation of something sharp scratching from within, causing her pain and fear. Every movement carried a threat, an invasion, as if another creature was growing, trying to break free. These pains were irregular, and Ava couldn't explain them. She tried to tell Noah, but he only assumed they were normal pregnancy symptoms, or that she was too stressed. Noah, with his scientific nature, still tried to find rational explanations for everything. He often leaned his ear close to Ava's belly, wanting to hear his child's heartbeat. However, what he heard was not a steady fetal heartbeat. It was a deep, low thump, like the impact of stone, a sound echoing from deep within the earth. That heartbeat was irregular, sometimes fast, sometimes slow, but always carried a sense of mystery and primordiality. This sound only appeared when he leaned his ear close to Ava's belly, and it did not seem to be the heartbeat of a living creature, but the heartbeat of something that had existed for millions of years. It was identical to the heartbeat he had sensed from the egg-shaped stone in Olympic National Park. And that sent chills down his spine. He knew there was an undeniable link between that stone and the fetus in Ava's womb. Ava began to feel her body was no longer her own. She felt a detachment from herself, as if something was slowly replacing her from within. Fear and confusion gnawed at her mind, causing insomnia and irritability. The stretch marks on her belly were not normal stretch marks, they were a faint bluish-black color, exactly like the glowing patterns on the egg-shaped stone. They looked like tiny roots crawling, clinging to her skin, vivid proof of the invasion of something ancient. Noah looked at those patterns, his eyes filled with worry. He knew something was wrong, but he couldn't explain it. He couldn't tell Ava about his suspicions, afraid it would cause her more panic. Both were trapped in their own fears, a fear of an unwanted life, a life growing and threatening to engulf them both. Ava's pregnancy continued in a strange and terrifying way, far exceeding all medical predictions. The deep thumping from within her belly continuously echoed, like a primordial drum beating the rhythm for an unwanted rebirth. Ava began to undergo terrifying changes in behavior and personality, increasingly worrying Noah. She became unusually irritable and aggressive, easily angered by the smallest things, and occasionally had short periods of memory loss, unable to remember what she had just said or done. Her eyes were often vacant, staring into the distance as if her mind were elsewhere. Ava's strange cravings didn't stop at raw meat. She developed an even more gruesome craving, fresh soil. She secretly went to the garden at night, scooping up soil with her bare hands and eating it ravenously, as if it were the most delicious food in the world. Noah was horrified when he discovered this. He tried to stop her, but Ava resisted fiercely, her eyes becoming wild and hostile. Once, Noah even saw her secretly eating wild mushrooms growing under ancient trees near their apartment. Mushrooms he knew were unsafe for humans. The human survival instinct in Ava seemed to be replaced by a more primordial, wilder instinct. An instinct of plants that consume soil and absorb nutrients from the environment. Ava's nightmares also became more vivid and haunting than ever. She continuously dreamed of being in a dark, cold, lightless space, where countless rigid, bluish-black roots pierced through her body, coiling tightly around every organ, every blood vessel. She felt her life being drained, but at the same time nourished by a strange energy. In her dream, she heard heavy breathing and ancient voices whispering an unidentified language, a sound not of humans, but like wind whistling through stone, roots crawling, earth cracking. Those voices repeatedly delivered a chilling message: you are nurturing a king. You are the gateway. You will become part of the kingdom. Ava woke in a panic, drenched in sweat, the whispers still echoing in her ears. Noah, though a rational scientist, could not explain these terrifying changes. He began to suspect that something beyond scientific understanding was happening to Ava. He spent time researching rare diseases, parasitic infections, but nothing fit. One night, as Ava lay in a deep sleep, Noah examined her body. To his horror, he discovered faint, glowing bluish-black patterns, identical to the patterns on the egg-shaped stone they had touched in Olympic National Park. These patterns appeared under Ava's abdominal skin, running from her navel down to her groin. Like glowing blood vessels, they became increasingly clear, as if a network of roots was crawling under her skin, absorbing her life and nourishing something growing within. Fear gnawed at Noah. He knew that this fetus was not a normal child, and Ava was being turned into a vessel for something ancient and horrifying. He tried to talk to Ava, but she seemed no longer herself. Her eyes were often vacant, and sometimes, she would mutter unidentified words, gruesome sounds that Noah had heard in his dreams. Noah felt utterly helpless. He was a scientist, but he was facing something that science couldn't explain, something slowly consuming the woman he loved. He knew he had to find a way to save Ava before she was completely transformed into a part of that ancient instinct, before she was completely consumed by the Azure King that dreams and whispers had warned about. Their lives, their love, were threatened by something beyond all definitions of life. The terrifying changes in Ava's behavior and body, along with the deep thumping echoing from within her, made it impossible for Noah to continue deceiving himself. He no longer thought this was preeclampsia or a psychological disorder. He knew that Ava was possessed, being turned into a vessel for something ancient and horrifying. In desperation, Noah decided to take Ava to the hospital, despite the fear that doctors wouldn't believe him, or would diagnose Ava with a mental illness. At a Seattle hospital, Ava was meticulously cared for by doctors and nurses. Noah tried to explain her strange symptoms. Her cravings for raw meat and fresh soil, her haunting dreams, and the glowing patterns under her skin. However, the doctors looked at him with skeptical eyes. They found no clear cause for Ava's strange behavior. They attributed it to severe preeclampsia, or a form of psychological disorder related to pregnancy. Although all medical tests yielded terrifyingly normal results, the fetus in Ava's womb continued to grow unusually fast, far exceeding all normal fetal growth charts. This further increased the medical team's bewilderment. While Ava lay in the hospital room, monitored by modern medical equipment, Noah relentlessly searched for answers. He spent hours on his computer, scouring medical databases, scientific forums, and even websites about mystical phenomena. He tried to find similar cases, mysterious illnesses related to pregnancy or body transformations. Finally, he discovered an old medical record, hidden in a leaked online medical archive. This record had no patient name, only an identification code. It documented similar symptoms in a woman in Seattle in the 1970s, cravings for non-food items, personality changes, and an abnormally growing fetus. The most terrifying thing was that the record ended with a brief note: the woman had disappeared without a trace right after giving birth, and the child was also undocumented. This evidence sent chills down Noah's spine. He knew that Ava was not an isolated case. She was a victim in a series of mysterious events, a curse that had existed for a very long time. In her delirium, Ava continuously drew gruesome pictures. She didn't use ordinary pens or paints, but self-made inks from soil and dried herbs. Sometimes even blood from unconscious scratches on her body. Her drawings depicted a colossal, tree-like creature, with twisted roots and branches like tentacles, emerging from the ground. That creature enveloped a pregnant woman, draining her life. These drawings were filled with ancient symbols Ava had never learned, primordial symbols evoking a gruesome feeling. As if they were drawn by an older, ancient intelligence. Noah looked at those drawings, fear gnawed at him. They were not just images. They were a warning, a prophecy of Ava's fate. When doctors tried to check the fetal heartbeat with an ultrasound machine, a strange phenomenon occurred. The ultrasound machine continuously emitted heavy static, buzzing, and crackling sounds. In the brief moments when the screen cleared, it wasn't a fetal heartbeat, but a heavy, deep breathing sound, echoing from deep within Ava's belly. It was the breath of a colossal creature from ancient times, a sound that did not belong to any human or animal on Earth. That breath was like a primordial rhythm. A curse from infinite space slowly returning. Doctors looked at each other, their eyes filled with confusion and skepticism, assuming the equipment was faulty. But Noah knew. He knew it was the breath of the thing growing inside Ava, the thing that had found a gateway to rebirth. Noah looked at Ava, who lay there, motionless, her face pale. And the glowing bluish-black patterns under her abdominal skin became clearer than ever. He knew he couldn't rely on science or medicine to save her. He had to find answers elsewhere. A place beyond the limits of reason and empirical evidence. He had to go back to where they found the egg-shaped stone, where everything had begun. He had to learn about the curse from infinite space. Before Ava was completely consumed by that ancient instinct, before she became an empty vessel. The heavy breathing from within Ava's belly, the gruesome drawings, and the mysterious medical record prompted Noah to make a reckless decision. He knew he couldn't rely on ordinary medicine or science to save the woman he loved. Despair had turned into determination. And Noah realized that the key to deciphering this horror lay where everything began, the ancient stone structure deep in the primeval forest of Olympic National Park. Where he and Ava had touched the fateful egg-shaped stone. He returned to Olympic National Park alone, carrying not only his most specialized scientific equipment, a handheld seismograph, a low-frequency recorder, an infrared camera, but also a cold fear creeping into every step. The forest retained its wild, mysterious beauty, but now, for Noah, it was no longer merely a place for botanical research. It was a cursed land, where something ancient was waiting to awaken. As Noah drew closer to the secluded forest area where the stone structure lay hidden, a strange sensation enveloped him. The air became terrifyingly silent. There were no birds chirping. No rustling leaves. The smell of damp earth and mold became more pungent, mingling with an eerily sweet scent, like the smell of decay and rebirth simultaneously. Noah's equipment began to behave abnormally. His handheld seismograph emitted frantic signals, its needle jumping wildly, indicating a colossal, primordial energy active deep underground. An energy he had never before recorded from any geological activity. His low-frequency recorder captured strange sounds, not animal noises or wind, but a deep, continuous vibration. Like the breathing of a colossal creature in a deep slumber. Finally, Noah reached the ancient stone structure. It still lay there, almost completely buried by moss and rocks. But now it seemed to radiate a distinct energy. He found the stone altar with the hollow cavity where the egg-shaped stone had once rested. As he bent down to examine it, a brand new, deep crack had appeared on the surface of the stone altar, extending down into the earth. From that crack, he heard whispers in an ancient language, not human voices. but like wind whistling through stone, roots crawling, earth cracking. Those sounds repeated unintelligible words, but Noah sensed a haunting presence, gateway, awakening, rebirth. He realized that the crack was a conduit, a doorway opening, allowing something from deep underground to communicate with the outside world. As Noah stood on the stone altar, strange things began to happen to the structure itself. The ancient stone structure began to glow faintly, a weak bluish-black light emanating from the strange patterns and symbols on its surface. That light was not ordinary light, but it seemed to have a life of its own, a strange vibration. The glowing patterns like blood vessels spread across the stone surface. Not only on the altar but also on the surrounding stone blocks, as if the entire structure was coming alive and reacting to Noah's presence. He felt the ground beneath his feet tremble slightly in rhythm with the deep thumping from deep underground, a heartbeat he had once heard from Ava's belly. Noah realized this stone structure was not just an ancient relic. It was a living entity, part of something much larger, something that had been sealed for thousands of years and was slowly awakening. The egg-shaped stone was just a seed, a starting point for rebirth. And Ava, who had touched it, had become the gateway for that ancient instinct's return. Extreme fear enveloped Noah. He no longer had any doubt. He was facing an extraterrestrial entity, or an ancient, unknown creature, something that had waited millennia to find a host, a way to return to the world. He knew that Ava was in real danger, and he had to find a way to close that gateway, to stop this terrifying rebirth, before it was too late. While Noah was engulfed in horror at Olympic National Park, discovering the truth about the ancient stone structure and the nature of the seed, Ava in the Seattle hospital was undergoing the final transformation. The fetus in her womb, which doctors still mistook for a normal baby, now seemed to possess supernatural energy and had completely controlled Ava's body. She was no longer herself, but a mindless vessel, completely controlled by the will of the entity within. Her face was pale, her eyes vacant, but her lips slightly moved, muttering ancient sounds, not words, but like a chilling hymn, a welcome for the entity's birth. The physical signs of possession became increasingly apparent and gruesome. Ava's hair, once soft and lustrous, began to grow rapidly and abnormally long, becoming dark and stiff like roots. They no longer fell naturally but protruded eerily from her head, coiling like tentacles searching for life. Her fingernails also grew long, sharp, and bluish-black. Exactly the color of the egg-shaped stone and the patterns under her abdominal skin. Ava, unconsciously, frequently scratched her own belly, her sharp fingernails leaving deep marks on her pale skin. As if the entity within was trying to break free by force, or Ava herself was trying to free herself from invisible shackles. The medical equipment in Ava's room continuously malfunctioned. The heart rate monitor emitted chaotic beeps, then abruptly fell silent. The digital clock's hands spun backward, displaying time illogically. Other electronic devices in the hospital room, from the television to the reading lamp, were mysteriously powered off, without any reason. Nurses and doctors felt mysteriously exhausted when near Ava. They frequently felt dizzy, nauseous, and utterly drained for no apparent reason, as if their life energy was being invisibly sucked dry. They couldn't understand what was happening, only able to think it was a rare disease or an unknown virus. That night, when Ava began labor, the manifestations of possession reached their peak. She no longer responded to any external stimuli. Her eyes were empty, lifeless, staring up at the ceiling. The groans from her throat were not the pains of a woman giving birth, but the growls and shrieks of a creature. mixed with the sound of roots crawling and stone cracking. This was not a normal birth. This was the birth of something that should not exist. The doctors and nurses in the room were all in a trance-like state. Their eyes were vacant, empty, their faces emotionless. They still performed medical procedures mechanically, unconsciously. Like puppets controlled by the entity's energy. They said nothing, showed no expression, just silently followed an invisible will. Noah, who had just returned from Olympic National Park, rushed into Ava's hospital room, horrified to witness that terrifying scene. He screamed Ava's name, trying to shake her awake, trying to stop the doctors. But no one responded. He felt utterly helpless, watching the woman he loved transform into a mindless vessel, controlled by something ancient and malevolent. The smell of damp earth and mold began to spread throughout the room, mingling with the eerily sweet scent of burning herbs and the metallic smell of blood, a haunting combination of life and death. From the corners of the room, blurry, bluish-black root-like vines began to emerge from the walls, from the floor, coiling around objects, pulling curtains. As if the room was coming alive and transforming into a part of the primeval forest, an extension of the ancient stone structure Noah had seen in Olympic National Park. Noah knew that the fateful moment had arrived. The ancient entity had completely possessed Ava, and it was preparing for its terrifying rebirth, turning the woman he loved into a living gateway for its return to the world. The horror of body horror and cosmic dread enveloped Noah, as he witnessed the woman he loved being deformed, deprived of herself by something beyond all human comprehension. The horrifying scene in Ava's hospital room, with the entity's manipulation of her and the medical staff, plunged Noah into a deep abyss of despair. He knew that Ava didn't have much time, and he couldn't rely on modern medicine to save her. Extreme fear had turned into a burning desire to find answers. A way to counteract the ancient instinct possessing the woman he loved. Noah left the hospital, leaving Ava in a state of complete control, and plunged into a frantic search. He went to the Seattle Public Library, scouring books on ancient botany, mythology, archaeology, and even documents on spiritual phenomena. He sought out archaeologists and ancient linguists, people who could help him decipher the strange symbols on the stone structure in Olympic National Park, or the ancient words Ava had mumbled in her delirium. He also didn't hesitate to visit online forums about mystical things, stories of strange disappearances in forests, supernatural phenomena related to plants. In his search for information, Noah met an elderly folklorist, a man with white hair and experienced eyes. This man told Noah about similar dreams of people who had ventured into primeval forests and been affected by inexplicable things. He said there were whispered tales of a seed growing inside them. Something primordial, non-human, but parasitic and developing within a living body. These people, after a time, either disappeared without a trace or were strangely transformed, becoming part of the forest. Noah shivered. What this old man described perfectly matched what was happening to Ava. The deeper he delved, the more Noah felt he was touching a horrifying truth buried for millennia. He discovered ancient documents, records in lost languages, speaking of an entity called the Azure King, an ancient plant spirit, a primordial consciousness, sealed underground for thousands of years by vanished ancient civilizations. Legend said that this king was not dead, but merely sleeping, awaiting the moment of rebirth. And to be reborn, it needed a host, gateway, a living body to nourish it, so it could return to this world and establish its kingdom. Extreme fear enveloped Noah when he found a warning note in an ancient document: whoever opens the gate shall become the mother. Whoever is the mother shall nourish. Whoever nourishes shall be consumed. Noah clutched the document, his palms drenched in sweat. He understood that Ava was not merely pregnant. She was being used as a gateway for the Azure King's rebirth. He remembered the egg-shaped stone in Olympic National Park, Ava's fateful touch, and the seed dream they both had. Everything connected in a chilling way. Noah returned to the hospital, his heart heavy. He looked at Ava, who lay there, her eyes vacant. Her bluish-black hair like roots and sharp fingernails horrifyingly long. He knew that the curse had completely possessed her. He tried to talk to the doctors, explaining about the Azure King, about the gateway, but they only looked at him with worried eyes, thinking he was suffering from severe nervous tension. He knew he couldn't count on them. He had to find a way to fight this ancient entity himself. Fear had turned into determination, a desperate determination to save the woman he loved from a horrifying fate. He had to find a way to close the gateway, before the Azure King was completely reborn and consumed everything. The chilling warning from the ancient document, whoever opens the gate shall become the mother. Whoever is the mother shall nourish. Whoever nourishes shall be consumed, resonated incessantly in Noah Harrison's mind. He returned to the hospital, looking at Ava lying there, her body terrifyingly transformed. And he knew that the fateful moment had arrived. He couldn't just stand by and watch the woman he loved become a vessel for something horrifying. Despair turned into an iron will. He had to find a way to stop this rebirth, no matter the cost. That night, what Noah feared most happened. Ava went into early labor. Her screams were not the pains of a woman giving birth, but the growls and shrieks of a creature, mixed with the sound of roots crawling and stone cracking. It was a terrifying symphony, a primordial sound of rebirth taking place. The doctors and nurses in the room, already manipulated by the entity's energy, continued their procedures unconsciously, their eyes vacant, faces expressionless, like controlled puppets. They did not realize the terrifying abnormality of the situation. Ava's hospital room became strangely dark, although the lights were still on. Blurry. Bluish-black root-like vines began to emerge from the walls, from the floor, coiling around objects, pulling curtains. As if the room was coming alive and transforming into a part of the primeval forest, an extension of the ancient stone structure Noah had seen in Olympic National Park. The smell of damp earth and mold became stiflingly pungent, mingling with the eerily sweet scent of burning herbs and the metallic smell of blood, a haunting combination of life and death. From Ava's belly, not a baby's cry, but a horrifying chorus of roots crawling, stone cracking, heavy breathing, and ancient whispers clearly echoed. Noah stared at Ava, extreme horror rising. Her belly was abnormally swollen, the glowing bluish-black patterns under her skin became clearer than ever, tiny roots seemed to twitch beneath. This was not life. This was something that should not exist. He felt a strong vibration from within, like the heartbeat of a colossal creature awakening. The doctors and nurses continued their work mechanically, their eyes empty. They said nothing, just silently followed an invisible will. Noah tried to stop them, screaming Ava's name, but his voice was swallowed by the horrifying chorus from her belly. He helplessly watched the woman he loved being transformed into a living gateway for the rebirth of something beyond all definitions of life and death. He felt utterly helpless. A heart-wrenching pain seeing Ava, the woman he loved most, being brutally destroyed. Just then, the horrifying birthing process began. Ava tensed. Not from pain but from a primordial force pushing from within. Not a baby, but a bluish-black organic mass, shaped like a large root, with sharp thorns, slowly emerged from Ava. It had no eyes or mouth, only a glowing cavity in the center, where the deep thumping echoed. That mass did not cry, made no sound, it simply crawled out, tiny root-like branches spreading, clinging to the floor, seeking life. That sight transcended all the horrors Noah had ever imagined. It was a violation of the nature of life, a creature that did not belong to this world. Immediately, a thick black smoke filled the room, carrying the pungent smell of damp earth. That smoke was not ordinary smoke, it was thick, as if it had a life of its own, coiling around the newly born entity. The smoke enveloped the bluish-black mass and quickly carried it out of the room, disappearing without a trace through the wall, as if space was no barrier. Noah only managed to see in that brief moment a faint ray of moonlight filtering through the window, illuminating the spot where the mass had just vanished. He knew, the Azure King had been reborn. And Ava had become the gateway for its horrifying return. Ava's hospital room fell into a terrifying silence. The thick black smoke carrying the bluish-black mass had vanished without a trace, leaving Noah standing there, stunned by the horrifying scene that had just unfolded. He looked at Ava, the woman he loved most, lying motionless on the bed. She had given birth to something non-human. An ancient instinct from primordial times. Immediately after giving birth, Ava's body began to shrivel horrifyingly fast. Her skin wrinkled, darkened like dry tree bark. Her hair fell out in large clumps, revealing a pale scalp. Her eyes remained wide open, staring blankly at the space where the entity had vanished, but they no longer held the light of life. Only emptiness and lifelessness. She no longer breathed. Ava Reed had passed away. She had become the gateway for the Azure King's rebirth, and the price paid was her very life. Her body was like an empty shell, a tree drained of its sap. The doctors and nurses, now freed from their trance, were horrified when they realized what had happened. They couldn't find the exact cause of Ava's death, only able to conclude that she suffered from complete exhaustion, a mysterious form of fatigue that medical science had never recorded. They looked at Noah with eyes full of pity and disbelief, unable to comprehend the horror he had just witnessed. Noah tried to explain, but his words were lost in their bewilderment. He knew they would never believe him, and he no longer had the strength to explain. On Ava's belly, where the fetus had developed, a large bluish-black stretch mark appeared. Not a normal stretch mark, but resembling the mark of crawling roots. That mark did not disappear with her death, but was deeply etched into her skin, like a permanent sign of the invasion. It was vivid proof of that terrifying rebirth, an incessant reminder of what had happened to Ava, of the ancient instinct that had possessed her and consumed her life. Noah touched that mark, feeling a cold current run up his arm, and a heart-wrenching pain gnawed at him. Noah survived, but he carried a terrifying haunting. His life had been completely turned upside down. He was no longer the rational botanist he once was. He began to feel very faint rustling sounds from within his body, like falling dry seeds, or the crawling of young roots. Sometimes he coughed up tiny, bluish-black, odorless, tasteless pollen grains. He realized a part of the entity was still within him, an invisible seed lurking. A trace of an unbreakable connection to the Azure King. He was a survivor, but also a potential host, a constant reminder of Ava's fate. In desperation for a final answer, Noah returned to Olympic National Park. He went to the ancient stone structure, where everything had begun. As he approached, he horrifyingly realized that the stone structure had grown larger. The grayish-blue stone blocks now enormous, rising from the earth like giant spines. From the cracks in the stone, bluish-black vines with glowing patterns like blood vessels were crawling rapidly throughout the forest, consuming everything in their path. Trees were tightly coiled by the vines, slowly dying. And the land became barren. The primeval forest had now transformed into a ghostly forest, dominated by the presence of the Azure King. Noah looked at the colossal stone structure, and he felt a deep thumping from deep underground, stronger and more regular than ever, like the heartbeat of a giant creature fully awakening. It was the heartbeat of the Azure King, which had been reborn and was beginning to establish its kingdom. Noah knew Ava had not died in vain. She had been the gateway, and now that gateway had opened completely. He was the only survivor carrying the haunting, and he understood that he had to find a way to stop the spread of this ancient instinct before it consumed the entire world. Ava's death and the terrifying rebirth of the Azure King transformed Noah Harrison's life into an inescapable tragedy. He survived, but he carried an incessant haunting, a burden of memory and existence. His apartment in Seattle, once a home of love and science, now became a prison of fear and solitude. Noah tried to live a normal life, but the symptoms and haunting relentlessly clung to him. He suffered from chronic insomnia, every night sinking into nightmares of Ava, the stone structure, and the relentless sound of roots crawling. When awake, he frequently heard heavy breathing and the rustling of roots crawling within his own body, a sound only he could perceive, like a constant reminder of the seed still existing within him. Those sounds were not loud, but enough to drive him mad, gnawing at his sanity bit by bit. Noah began to discover terrifying changes in his body. Thin, bluish-black hairs grew from his pores, especially on his arms and legs. They were not normal hairs. They were stiff and coarse like young roots. He tried to pluck them, using tweezers, using razors, but they grew back immediately, becoming denser and denser, as if his body was slowly transforming. His skin also began to have faint bluish-black patches, especially on his abdomen and chest. These patches were slightly rough, like young bark forming. Noah looked in the mirror, horrified to realize he was slowly losing his human form, being assimilated by something primordial. Noah's survival instincts also changed. He began to crave sunlight intensely. He couldn't stay in darkness for long. Whenever there was insufficient light, his skin became pale and cold, his body trembled. But upon exposure to sunlight, his skin would become hot and slightly green, as if he was absorbing energy from the light like a plant. He spent hours sitting under the sun, feeling a strange connection to the surrounding plant world. His sleep also became more haunting. Noah continuously dreamed of transforming into a colossal tree, roots deeply embedded in the earth. Sensing his connection to the entire underground plant network, in his dream, he heard ancient voices whispering an unidentified language, a sound not of humans, but of plants and stone, calling him the gatekeeper. That was the invitation of the Azure King, wanting him to become part of its kingdom. In his search for liberation, Noah went to leading scientists, renowned spiritual researchers, but no one could help him. They all looked at him with worried eyes, thinking he was hallucinating or suffering from a mental disorder. Some tried to treat him with medication, but it had no effect. He knew he was slowly being consumed, and no one could stop it. Every day that passed, Noah felt the Azure King's control grow stronger. He no longer thought this was a haunting, but an assimilation. He was becoming part of that entity, a cell in its colossal body. The smell of damp earth and mold in his apartment became more pungent than ever, as if the house was turning into an underground forest. Strange bioluminescent mushrooms, like those he touched in the Amazon, emitting a faint green light, began to grow in his house, on walls, on objects, on Ava's furniture, and even on his clothes. They were clear signs that the entity's invasion was taking place irresistibly. Noah looked in the mirror, his eyes filled with despair. He no longer recognized himself. His face had distorted. His features had changed, and his eyes were deep, empty, but glimmered with a faint green light, like the color of the Azure King. He knew that the final moment had arrived. He would no longer be Noah Harrison. He would become the gatekeeper, a part of the Azure King's deep-rooted kingdom. The old, decaying diary of the missing botanist was the final prophecy, confirming Noah Harrison's horrifying fate. He could not escape this assimilation. His body continued to transform terrifyingly, becoming heavier each day, pulling him deeper into the essence of the ancient entity. His skin now had large bluish-black patches, rough and coarse like old bark. His fingernails were hard and thick like wood, no longer human. Bluish-black hairs like roots grew densely all over his body, forming a peculiar coating, making him look like a hybrid creature of human and plant. Noah had completely lost the ability to speak. Every attempt to produce sound resulted only in faint rustling or heavy, deep breathing, exactly like the fetal breathing he had heard from Ava's belly. The deprivation of verbal communication plunged him into an abyss of solitude and helplessness. He felt as if he was imprisoned within his own body, a living prison, unable to cry for help, unable to convey the terrifying truth he was facing. However, during his transformation, Noah developed a strange ability. He could perceive the life of plants deep underground. He could hear the voices of roots and molds, a primordial language, a symphony of life and death unfolding within the earth. He sensed the massive network of roots crawling, connecting everything underground. He realized that strange bioluminescent mushrooms, emitting a faint green light, were not only growing in his house but also spreading throughout the city. On building walls, on sidewalks, on objects, as signs that the entity's invasion was taking place irresistibly. Noah's dreams also became more vivid and haunting than ever. He continuously dreamed of the Azure King, the entity from Part 7, growing into a colossal creature, an endless mass of vegetation, engulfing the entire city of Seattle. In his dream, he saw himself no longer human, but a part of that king, roots deeply embedded in the earth, sensing his connection to the entire underground plant network. He heard the king's deep breathing, and ancient voices whispering an unidentified language, a language of plants and stone, calling him the gatekeeper. That was the king's invitation, wanting him to become a part of its kingdom. A gatekeeper, to protect its rebirth and its spread across the world. Unable to resist any longer, Noah felt an invisible force pulling him towards Olympic National Park, where he had found the fateful egg-shaped stone. The call of the Azure King had become too strong, irresistible. He had no choice but to accept his fate, to become a part of that ancient instinct. When Noah arrived at Olympic National Park, the forest had completely transformed. The ancient stone structure they had found had now grown much larger, the grayish-green stone blocks now enormous, rising from the earth like giant spines. It glowed intensely, an eerie bluish-black light emanating from the patterns and symbols on its surface. The cracks on the stone surface seemed to widen. like waiting mouths, emitting a deep, resonant thumping throughout the forest. Noah felt an irresistible urge to step inside. A chilling chorus echoed throughout the forest. The sound of roots crawling, heavy breathing, rustling leaves, and ancient whispers, all blending into a mesmerizing lullaby, drawing him into the center of the structure. That was the final call of the Azure King, a lullaby for its new gatekeeper. In his last moments of rationality, Noah saw Ava's blurry image flitting between the bluish-black vines. She said nothing, just waved weakly, her eyes filled with pain, as if she was still trapped there, imprisoned by the entity itself. That was the final warning, a heart-wrenching pain for Noah. But he couldn't turn back. Noah stepped into the stone structure, accepting his fate. He no longer had the ability to resist. His body began to rapidly deform. His skin turned into bark, his limbs into roots, and his hair into leaves. He was no longer human, but became part of the stone structure, a new gatekeeper for the Azure King. Immediately after Noah's assimilation, the stone structure slowly closed, the cracks on the altar sealing completely, as if nothing had ever happened. The forest returned to its initial tranquility, no longer glowing or making strange noises. But from deep underground, a deep thumping echoed, stronger and more regular than ever, like the heartbeat of a colossal creature fully awakening. The Azure King had been reborn. The fateful touch of the egg-shaped stone in Olympic National Park had put an end to Noah Harrison. He had become the new gatekeeper. A part of the ancient stone structure, a tool for the Azure King's terrifying rebirth. The primeval forest, where he once sought rare plants, now became a symbol of invasion. A testament to the brutal power of that ancient instinct. Noah's transformation was complete. His body, once that of a rational scientist, had now completely merged with the stone structure. His skin turned into rough, dark bluish-black bark, his limbs transformed into colossal roots deeply embedded in the earth, and his hair became withered leaves. He was no longer human, but became part of the stone structure, a living gatekeeper, his eyes deep, empty, but glimmering with a faint green light, like the color of the Azure King. He could sense the massive network of roots crawling, connecting everything underground, hearing the voices of plants and molds, a primordial language that only he could understand. He was part of the deep-rooted kingdom, a pawn in the symphony of invasion. Immediately after Noah's assimilation, the stone structure slowly closed, the cracks on the altar sealing completely. As if nothing had ever happened. The forest returned to its initial tranquility, no longer glowing or making strange noises. But from deep underground, a deep thumping echoed. Stronger and more regular than ever, like the heartbeat of a colossal creature fully awakening. The Azure King had been reborn. It had found its gatekeeper, and now it was ready to expand its kingdom into the outside world. A few years later, the city of Seattle, where Noah and Ava once lived, began to experience strange plant-related events. Initially, these were just small phenomena, easy to overlook. Unusual bluish-black vines, with faint glowing patterns, began to grow rapidly, covering old buildings, creeping into dark alleys, and crawling on moss-covered walls. They resembled no known plant species. Botanists were baffled. They tried to destroy them with the strongest herbicides, but it was futile. The vines could not be destroyed, and they grew at a terrifying rate, turning concrete streets into miniature dense forests. Gradually, these vines didn't just grow on buildings. They started crawling onto the streets, destroying sidewalks, cracking asphalt. They coiled around utility poles, traffic signs, turning them into bizarre natural sculptures. The pungent smell of damp earth and mold began to spread throughout the city, mingling with the eerily sweet scent of burning herbs and the metallic smell of blood. A haunting combination of life and death. Sometimes, sensitive people would smell burning herbs, or the old metallic scent of blood from accidents, even without any clear source. The air in the city became heavy and gloomy, as if something invisible was breathing and growing underneath. People who had contact with Noah or Ava, e.g., doctors, nurses in the hospital, or even their old friends, began to exhibit strange symptoms. They strangely craved soil, or coughed up tiny, bluish-black pollen grains. Sometimes, their eyes would become empty, vacant. And they would mutter unidentified words, ancient sounds that no one understood. They weren't completely possessed like Ava, but they were becoming new gatekeepers of the Azure King. Living connection points for its spread into the world. These signs indicated that the ancient entity didn't stop at Olympic National Park. It had found its way back. And it was beginning to establish its kingdom, turning Seattle into a gigantic urban garden, where ancient instinct would dominate. The city of Seattle, once a symbol of technology and dynamism, was now slowly transforming into a colossal urban forest, a kingdom of the Azure King. Bluish-black vines with faint glowing patterns crawled everywhere, consuming everything in their path. They didn't just cover buildings and streets, but also infiltrated every corner of urban life, transforming modern architectural structures into bizarre, inanimate natural sculptures. The pungent smell of damp earth and mold spread throughout the city, mingling with the scent of burning herbs and the metallic smell of blood, creating a suffocating and terrifying atmosphere. An undeniable sign of transformation. Gradually, there was no longer any trace of humans in the invaded areas. Roads, shops, houses, all were completely covered by vines and roots, transforming into colossal organic architectural masses. The city was dead, and a new, more ancient life had risen from the ashes of civilization. The colossal plant creature, the Azure King, now dominated the entire area. It was not just mere plant life, but a conscious entity, formed from millions of intertwined roots and vines, and it breathed with a deep, steady thumping, echoing from deep underground, like the heartbeat of an ancient god controlling its kingdom. When one looked closely at the colossal vines and trunks covering the city, one could faintly discern the distorted faces of those they had consumed. These were the faces of Ava, Noah, doctors, nurses, and countless other assimilated Seattle residents. Those faces appeared blurry, distorted, like living memories, on the surface of the plants, their eyes empty and full of pain, eternally imprisoned in the Azure King's kingdom. They couldn't cry for help, couldn't escape, they were just trapped images, traces of souls consumed by the ancient instinct. Those remaining in the area or who dared to approach the boundary of the urban forest would hear whispers from the plants. It wasn't the rustling of leaves, but an ancient, deep voice, echoing from the vines, from the colossal trunks. The voice was not threatening, but a captivating invitation: join us. Become part of the kingdom. Become eternal memory. It was a promise of eternity, of escaping the loneliness of human existence, by becoming part of that ancient instinct, a cell in the Azure King's colossal body. At night, from these urban forests, a deep, ancient lullaby could be heard, echoing everywhere, like a king singing to his kingdom. It was the symphony of rebirth, a ghostly music formed from the sound of roots crawling, stone cracking, heavy breathing, and ancient whispers. It was the song of the Azure King, inviting new souls to assimilate, expanding its kingdom across the world. Humans who had been assimilated did not die completely. Their souls were trapped within the massive root network, becoming a part of the Azure King's living memory. Forever gatekeepers for its eternal existence. They had no independent will, no individual thoughts. They were just cells in the entity's colossal body, witnessing everything through its eyes. It was a horrifying fate, a form of eternal existence in captivity, no longer human, but a part of a primordial instinct. Scientists, though they researched and discovered many things, remained helpless. They realized that this was not an ordinary plant species, but a transcendent entity, far exceeding all biological definitions. They could not destroy it, could not stop its spread. The kingdom of the Azure King continued to expand. The city of Seattle had been completely consumed, becoming a colossal urban forest, a horrifying testament to the rebirth of ancient instinct. But the entity's expansion did not stop there. It no longer needed ancient stone altars or a single host gateway to continue spreading. From the invaded urban forests, tiny, bluish-black, odorless, tasteless pollen grains were born from the Azure King's own colossal body. These pollen grains flew with the wind, infiltrating the air, traveling hundreds, thousands of miles, carrying the entity's seed to other cities around the world. They clung to human skin, infiltrated respiratory systems, entering the bodies of innocent residents, opening new gateways for the invasion. In distant cities, a strange and terrifying phenomenon began to appear. Some newborns were born with strange birthmarks on their skin. These birthmarks were not like ordinary birthmarks. They were shaped like bluish-black root branches, with faint glowing patterns. Exactly like the patterns on the egg-shaped stone that Noah and Ava had found. These birthmarks did not disappear over time, but were deeply etched into the children's skin, like a permanent sign of the invasion. They were evidence that these children had been marked, chosen to become future potential gateways or gatekeepers, carrying the seed of the Azure King from birth. Mothers of children with these birthmarks began having dreams similar to Ava Reed. They dreamed of a bluish-black seed growing inside them, tiny roots crawling, coiling tightly around every internal organ. They heard a deep thumping from deep within their bodies, a sound that did not belong to any human or animal. Ancient, unintelligible voices whispered a language of plants and stone, saying they were nurturing a king, something primordial trying to return to the world. Fear and confusion gnawed at their minds, making them worry about the unwanted life growing inside. In newly affected cities, people began to hear heavy breathing from underground. It wasn't the breathing of humans or animals, but the breathing of a colossal creature from ancient times, a primordial sound of life rising from the depths. They felt a slight vibration, like the heartbeat of a giant entity, spreading from deep beneath sidewalks and streets. Those sounds were not loud, but enough to make them uneasy, evoking a vague sense of fear about something lurking beneath their feet, waiting for the moment to erupt. Scientists, though they researched and discovered many things, remained helpless. They realized that this was not an ordinary plant species, but a transcendent entity, far exceeding all biological definitions. They could not destroy it, could not stop its spread. The plant samples they collected from Seattle began to show strange behaviors. They moved slightly on their own in the laboratory, tiny roots crawling across the lab tables. Sometimes, tiny, bluish-black pollen grains would automatically fly from them, clinging to the scientist's skin, causing uncomfortable itching, a sign that the invasion was silently taking place. Some scientists tried to decipher signals from the plants. They discovered that they emitted a form of low-frequency sound, not speech, but an ancient language. A primordial form of communication that humans had never known. When partially deciphered, they horrifyingly realized the repeated words, absorb, rebirth, kingdom. That was the Azure King's invitation, a call for the living to assimilate into its kingdom, a promise of eternity in captivity. Scientists tried to communicate this to the public. But their voices were lost amidst the confusion and despair of a collapsing world. Gradually, some researchers who were too obsessed with the entity began to exhibit symptoms similar to Noah Harrison. They craved soil, coughed up bluish-black pollen, their bodies showed bluish-black patterns. Exactly like the patterns on the egg-shaped stone and on Ava's body. Sometimes, their eyes would become empty, vacant, and they would mutter unidentified words, ancient sounds. Like new gatekeepers of the Azure King. They had been assimilated, becoming part of the entity's perceptual network, witnessing its expansion powerlessly. However, they were no longer afraid. Instead, they had a strange peace, an acceptance of fate, a belief that they were becoming part of something greater, more eternal. They became the final witnesses. Living witnesses to the end of humanity and the rise of a new kingdom. These people, with their empty eyes and strange manifestations, often sat alone, staring blankly at vine-covered walls. As if they were seeing something others could not. They no longer communicated normally, only occasionally emitting faint rustles or heavy breathing, like the Azure King. Their existence was a chilling reminder of the fate of those who dared to resist or try to understand this ancient entity. They were humans stripped of their self. Yet they were the only witnesses to the ceaseless expansion of the Azure King, a primordial entity re-establishing nature's order. Humans began to understand that they were facing a battle they could not win. Acceptance gradually replaced fear. Urban forests expanded, consuming cities. And survivors had to find a way to adapt to a new world, where nature had regained control, but not the nature they once knew. That was the kingdom of the Azure King. An ancient instinct that had returned to re-establish its order, and humanity was merely living memories in its body. The kingdom of the Azure King had truly risen. From the primeval forests of Olympic National Park, to the consumed streets of Seattle, and now, spreading across major cities globally, this ancient entity had re-established the order of nature. Transforming the world into a colossal garden, where humans were no longer the dominant species, but only living memories. Tiny, bluish-black pollen grains continued to be born from the invaded urban forests, flying with the wind, infiltrating the air, traveling thousands of miles. Carrying the entity's seed to every corner of the world. In newly affected areas, pregnant women began to feel strange movements in their bellies. They were not gentle kicks, but strong thumps. Violent thrashing, and sometimes the sensation of something sharp scratching from within. Glowing bluish-black patterns began to appear under their abdominal skin. Like a sign that they had been chosen as new gateways, living vessels for the Azure King's unending rebirth. As night fell, from the invaded urban forests, a deep, ancient lullaby could be heard. Echoing everywhere. It was not a human lullaby, but the song of a king singing to his kingdom, a ghostly symphony formed from the sound of roots crawling, stone cracking, heavy breathing, and ancient whispers. It was the song of the Azure King, inviting new souls to assimilate, expanding its kingdom across the world. Humans had been consumed, but they did not die completely. Their souls were trapped within the Azure King's massive root network, becoming a part of the entity's living memory. They had no independent will, no individual thoughts. They were just cells in the king's colossal body, witnessing everything through its eyes. They were imprisoned gatekeepers, forever a part of the Azure King's eternal existence. A primordial instinct that had re-established nature's order. Scientists, who had once tried to research and resist the entity, were now also part of the deep-rooted kingdom. Their bodies had transformed, merged with plants, their eyes were empty, and they only emitted faint rustling sounds. They were the final witnesses. Living witnesses to the end of humanity and the rise of a new kingdom. They were fragments in the overall picture of the invasion, a reminder that all attempts to resist the Azure King were futile. The world had changed. Skyscrapers transformed into colossal plant spines. Asphalt roads became rivers of roots. The oceans turned into vast kelp forests. The Azure King had established its kingdom. A kingdom of primordial life, where humans were merely memories, hosts who had fulfilled their mission. Nature can be a gift, but it can also be an ancient curse, burying secrets that humans should never touch. Do you believe that life always finds a way to exist, even if it has to consume everything in its path? Now, look at the trees around you. Right now. Listen to the sound of roots crawling underground. Is there a heartbeat that isn't your own? Or a tiny pollen grain, flying in the air, waiting to find a new host? Because it's very possible. The ancient seed has found its way back. And you could be its next gateway. If you have felt a chill from this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Whisper Horror channel so you don't miss the next haunting stories. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Do you believe in the Azure King? And do you think, are we being invaded by something ancient, invisible, every day?